He was just a black waiter working the graveyard shift. She was a billionaire heiress, drunk and barely standing. What started as one simple act of kindness turned into a war against racism, a secret recording, and the most epic revenge ever served in a sushi restaurant. If you've ever felt underestimated because of how you look, this story is for you. The woman toppled off the bar stool like a sack of potatoes. Her $3,000 Italian designer dress was now soaked in top-shelf sake that had just spilled across the floor. It was 2:30 a.m. at Sakura Palace, and Award Santos knew his shift should have ended an hour ago. But he was still there standing watching one of the richest women in Manhattan stagger dangerously close to the marble stairs. "Ma'am, let me help you," Award said softly, stepping toward her with care. At 26, Award had learned that drunk women, especially drunk wealthy women, could be wildly unpredictable, especially when the person offering help was a black man. 3 years working here had taught him that kindness could easily be mistaken for ulterior motives. "I don't need your pity," she mumbled, trying to steady herself against the Japanese cherrywood wall. Her platinum blonde hair was a mess, her makeup smeared, but there was no mistaking her Jessica Steinberg, the heiress to a hotel empire stretching across the East Coast. Award hesitated. Over the past few months, he'd started noticing something strange whenever Jessica showed up. Conversations would suddenly stop, eyes would avert, especially from manager Morrison and that clique of office friends she always came in with. "Let me call a taxi for you," Award offered. "It's not safe to be out like this alone." Jessica blinked a few times, trying to focus on him. "You're not like the others," she whispered, leaning fully into his arm. "Why are you being nice to me? Everyone else just wants something from me." The Award frozen. Honestly, he wasn't sure he had an answer. Maybe it was because he grew up watching his mom scrub floors 16 hours a day to raise 3 kids, and he knew what it felt like to be forgotten. Or maybe it was because lately Award had started to realize that Sakura Palace wasn't nearly as polished as it looked on the outside. As they stood waiting for the Uber on the quiet sidewalk, Jessica mumbled something about genuine people and second chances. Award figured it was just drunken rambling, but he still remembered the address she gave the driver, a penthouse on the Upper East Side worth more than his entire life put together. What Award didn't know was that the entire conversation between him and Jessica had been recorded by the restaurant's security camera, every single second of it. The next morning, Award showed up to work thinking it would be just another day at Sakura Palace. He had no idea that his act of kindness the night before had been witnessed not by Jessica, but by someone far more sober. And that very kindness was about to be twisted in a way he never could have seen coming. Head chef Hiroshi Tanaka greeted Award with a look that wasn't like any he'd seen before. "Award, I need to speak with you. In the office. Now." The chef's voice didn't carry its usual calm. There was weight in it, tension, and that was something Award had rarely sensed from the usually composed Japanese chef. His heart started to beat faster. After 3 years at Sakura Palace, Award knew one thing for sure. Getting called to the office almost never meant good news, especially not for employees like him. And he was right. Inside the office, James Morrison, the regional manager, infamous for his polished smile and veiled threats, was leaning back against the desk, a folder in his hand. "Have a seat," Morrison said, flipping through the papers with slow, deliberate movements. Award sat down. Sweat began to form at his temples. "I've received a few complaints about your conduct with a guest," Morrison began. "Seems you may have crossed a line." "What line?" Award frowned. "Harassing an intoxicated guest, offering services off the clock without authorization. Some are saying you tried to take advantage of a guest's vulnerable state, particularly someone like Ms. Steinberg." It felt like someone had punched Award straight in the gut. He knew exactly which night Morrison was referring to. But the way he twisted it, taking a simple act of human decency and turning it into something filthy, left Award speechless. "I was just making sure someone got home safe," Award said, trying to keep calm while fury boiled inside him. Anyone with a conscience would have done the same. Morrison gave a cold smile, unzipping his briefcase and pulling out a few printed stills from the restaurant's security footage. "Of course. But the thing is, we can't have employees like you creating misunderstandings like this." Our clients expect a certain level of discretion and clear boundaries. A heavy silence filled the room. Award knew exactly what this was. Didn't matter how many compliments he'd gotten, how spotless his record was to Morrison, he was still just a potential liability, a black man who'd forgotten his place. So, what exactly are you saying? Award asked, though deep down he already knew the answer. I'm saying, maybe it's time you consider finding a job that's more aligned with your record. But what neither Morrison nor Award could have possibly known was that at that very moment, somewhere else in the city, Jessica Steinberg was having a very different kind of conversation with her legal team. A conversation that wouldn't just alter the course of Award's life, but would blow the lid off dark secrets that had been buried at Sakura Palace for years. The truth was Jessica had been far more sober that night than anyone realized, and what she had uncovered about Morrison and the hiring and firing practices he controlled was about to erupt in a way no one could have predicted. The following morning, Award walked into Sakura Palace like he always did, thinking it would be just another regular shift. He had no idea that his kindness from the night before had been noted not by a drunken socialite, but by someone far more aware than Jessica had appeared to be, and that it would soon be used in a way he never could have imagined. As he stepped inside, he was met by head chef Hiroshi Tanaka, waiting with a look of quiet sympathy. Award, I kept this for you, the chef said, gently handing him a sealed envelope. The past 6 months of tips. I set them aside, they belong to you. Award took the envelope, unable to speak. He didn't yet understand what was happening, not fully, but a strange unease began to stir inside him. After his shift, Award walked out into the soft October drizzle and called his mother. Mom, I lost my job, he said plainly. Rosa Santos, working the night shift cleaning offices on Wall Street, stopped what she was doing. Did you do something wrong? No, I did the right thing. Silence. Rosa knew her son too well not to hear the storm behind that answer. Come home. Talk to me. The two-bedroom apartment in Queens where Award had grown up still smelled like bleach, strong coffee, and quiet worry. At 6 a.m. the next morning, Rosa walked through the door in her janitor's uniform and found her son sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by scribbled notes. What's all this? She asked, pouring coffee into 2 mismatched mugs. I'm trying to figure out what really happened at work, Award replied, handing her the pages. Remember that supervisor you had back when you were cleaning at Goldman Sachs? The one who always gave you the worst floors to mop? Thompson. Rosa nodded, her eyes darkening. 20 years of janitorial work, and you never had problems with anyone except him. Every time you stood your ground, he made sure you paid for it. Exactly, Award said, his voice rising. Morrison's doing the same thing to me, just in a slicker way. Award told his mother everything about Jessica, the fabricated accusations, and the patterns he'd started to notice over the past few months, Black and Latino workers being reassigned or fired for minor mistakes, the same ones white employees made with no consequences at all. Rosa placed her hand over his. Sometimes life puts us in a position where we have to choose accept injustice or stand up and fight. And you already know which one I always chose. Award smiled, the first real smile he'd managed in days. Rosa Santos had raised 3 children on her own after her husband died in a workplace accident. She'd endured racist supervisors, snide comments from wealthy women, and an entire system designed to remind her that she didn't belong, and not once in her life had she bowed her head. So what are you going to do now? Rosa asked. I don't know, Award said quietly, but I'm not going to pretend like nothing happened. On Monday morning, Award returned to Sakura Palace not as an employee, but as a customer. He requested a table tucked away in the corner and sat quietly observing everything he'd once been too busy to notice. Morrison strutted through the dining room like a king surveying his court, stopping to whisper with important white patrons while completely ignoring tables with black and brown customers. And then Award saw something unusual. Jessica Steinberg walked in, alone. She asked for a discreet seat near the bar. Morrison rushed over immediately, smiling, bowing all charm. But Jessica brushed him off gently and took her seat in silence, watching the room carefully. Award realized she was doing exactly what he was observing, taking mental notes, noticing the kinds of things most people overlooked. When their eyes met, she gave him a slight, almost imperceptible nod. A greeting. A signal. That night, Award received a text from an unknown number. Coffee, tomorrow at 9 a.m., Back Corner Deli Cafe, 72nd and Columbus. We have a lot to discuss. V. Award barely slept. After 3 years at Sakura Palace, he knew one thing for certain. Someone like Jessica Steinberg didn't send messages to someone like him without a very specific reason. And since Morrison had already used her name to justify firing him, that reason was bound to be interesting. He pulled out the old notebook, the one he'd been scribbling in for months, jotting down every strange incident at the restaurant. Dates, times, odd conversations, customers getting special treatment for no clear reason. He'd never really known why he kept recording all of it. But something inside him had always whispered, one day this is going to matter. Now, as he flipped through the pages, each line in his neat handwriting, Award understood. It wasn't a coincidence that Morrison had been so eager to push him out, because people who notice the details are always a threat to those with something to hide. Every time Morrison had belittled him, Award had thought it was weakness. But in truth, every act of disrespect had only been sharpening something inside him that Morrison never saw coming, a quiet, unshakable will like a diamond forming under pressure. The Deli Cafe on 72nd Street wasn't the kind of place millionaires usually walked into. The chairs were worn, the coffee came in thick ceramic mugs, and the air always smelled faintly of bacon grease. Award arrived 10 minutes early, taking a seat in the back corner. He still wasn't entirely convinced Jessica Steinberg actually wanted to meet him. At exactly 9 a.m., she walked in, jeans. A simple blouse, though Award was pretty sure that blouse alone cost more than his monthly paycheck back at Sakura Palace. Gone was the glamorous makeup and the perfectly styled hair from that night. She looked strangely ordinary until she opened her mouth. "You got fired because of me," she said bluntly, sitting across from him. "Morrison told you I filed a harassment complaint." Award nodded. "That's what he told me." "It was a lie," Jessica said, pulling out her phone and sliding it across the table. On the screen was an email from Sakura Palace, thanking her for her special cooperation and asking her to commend the employee who helped her get home safely. Award read it twice. The date and time matched perfectly. "So Morrison made it all up. But why are you showing me this?" Jessica gave a small smile, but it wasn't a warm one. "Because my company holds partial equity in the firm funding Sakura Palace's expansion. And for the past 6 months, I've been investigating a very clear pattern of racial bias in their hiring and firing practices." Award felt his chest tighten. "You knew I was going to be fired." "I suspected it," she said. "Morrison has a history. 3 black employees were let go last year for minor infractions. Meanwhile, white staff did the exact same things and kept their jobs. A Latino employee who got glowing reviews from guests was reassigned to the back kitchen. You were next." She opened her briefcase and slid a thick folder across the table. Employment contracts, performance reviews, guest feedback records. Award recognized some of the names former co-workers who'd just disappeared with no clear explanation. Morrison is quietly building a front-of-house staff that's entirely white. Keeps a few Latino workers in the kitchen for optics, but any black employee in a visible role, one by one they're removed. Award stared at the papers. "Where did you get all of this?" "I'm an investor. I have access to HR reports," Jessica said, then paused. "And I have personal reasons for wanting Morrison held accountable." Over the next hour, Jessica told her own story, how Morrison had repeatedly dismissed every proposal for diversity initiatives, how he'd sneered every time she brought up minority customers, how he used his position to handpick not just the staff, but even the clientele based on his own prejudiced standards. "That night you helped me," Jessica continued. "I wasn't as drunk as you thought. I was testing how staff would respond to someone vulnerable. Morrison saw me come in and disappeared. You were the only one who stepped in." Award leaned back in his seat, letting out a breath. "So, it was all a setup. The situation, yes, but your response wasn't. You genuinely cared about helping a stranger. And that alone told me you were the kind of person I needed." She opened her laptop and pulled up a detailed presentation, ethnic breakdowns in hiring, retention rates, promotion trends. "I'm preparing a lawsuit against Morrison for systemic discrimination, but I need a witness. I need someone to be a coordinator, someone who knows who can be trusted. And I want to offer you the position of general manager at a new Japanese restaurant we're opening in Harlem. Co-ownership, profit sharing with staff, transparent diversity policies. Award sat silently for a long moment. The offer was compelling, almost too good. But he wasn't naive. What's the real reason, he asked? Jessica smiled this time, a real honest smile. Morrison underestimated me because I'm a woman, and young. He underestimated you because you're a black man, just a waiter in his eyes. But people like him always make the same mistake, arrogance. You can help me take him down, and I believe you can build something he'd never even dare to imagine. Award thought of his mother, the stack of bills, 3 years of swallowing his pride at Sakura Palace. He thought of his coworkers who had vanished quietly one by one. If I do this, it won't be just to get a better job. I'll do it because I want Morrison to answer for what he's done. Jessica extended her hand. That's exactly why I chose you. That afternoon, Award called 3 former coworkers from Sakura Palace. 2 agreed to meet and talk. The third, Marcus, was still working quietly in the kitchen and said he'd be willing to start recording the acts of discrimination still happening behind closed doors. Over the next 2 weeks, Award transformed into someone completely different, a strategist Morrison would never see coming. He began collecting testimonies, recording calls with consent, and photographing documents that Marcus discreetly passed along. Each piece of evidence was a puzzle fragment revealing the depth of the systemic racism Morrison had engineered. He wasn't just some passive bigot, he was the architect of exclusion, wielding his power to turn Sakura Palace into the kind of elite haven that matched his narrow, prejudiced vision. Meanwhile, Morrison carried on blissfully unaware inside his bubble of arrogance. He ruled the restaurant like a king, not realizing that every discriminatory comment, every biased decision was being carefully documented. It was his own ego that handed him the rope he'd soon hang himself with. At one point, Morrison even smiled smugly after demoting a high-performing Latino staffer to a less visible position. In his mind, he was perfecting his kingdom, but Award knew the truth. The one holding real power now was him. The meeting was set for Monday, 10 a.m. at Sakura Palace's corporate office. Morrison walked in with his usual confidence, assuming it was just another routine operations meeting with investors. He had no idea that Award was sitting one floor above in a different conference room watching everything unfold via live feed. Jessica entered the room accompanied by 2 lawyers and a representative from the company's ethics board. Morrison flashed his usual fake smile, straightening his tie as if preparing to accept an award. Mr. Morrison, Jessica began, placing a thick folder on the table. We need to address some serious concerns regarding your hiring and firing practices. Morrison gave a casual chuckle. Of course, we're always looking to optimize. I trust you've seen how I maintain the restaurant's standards by removing problematic elements. One of the lawyers turned on the projector. A chart appeared on screen: 18 months of termination records, 100% of black front-of-house staff fired, 80% of Latino employees reassigned to back-of-house roles, 0% of white staff dismissed for the same infractions. Morrison's smile faltered. Those numbers must be statistical anomalies or something like that. Anomalies, Jessica said, pressing the remote. The next slide played an audio recording Morrison's own voice speaking about appropriate customers and maintaining the restaurant's image. He was heard instructing supervisors to find excuses to terminate specific employees. In another clip, Morrison toasted a glass after firing Award. One more problem dealt with. Morrison's face turned pale. Sweat began to bead on his forehead. These recordings are illegal, Morrison stammered. Actually, no, the lawyer replied calmly. All were recorded with the consent of at least one party. Fully admissible, Jessica continued clicking through slides, internal emails, HR documents, signed testimonies, and then the final blow, a video of Morrison alone in his office, clinking a glass of champagne, toasting to Award's dismissal. Morrison stared at the screen in disbelief. Who filmed that? Someone you underestimated, Jessica said coldly. Someone who worked here for 3 years, documenting, witnessing every one of your discriminatory decisions. The conference room door opened. Award stepped inside carrying a large file box. Morrison looked at him like he'd seen a ghost. No, it can't be. You're just a black waiter. That's right, Award said, placing the box on the table. I was just a waiter until you taught me that someone like me has to be 10 times smarter than someone like you just to survive. He opened the box recordings, email printouts, testimonies, hard evidence. Each item a piece of a puzzle that no one could deny. You built a system so blatantly racist, a blind jury could see it. Morrison shot to his feet. This is a setup. I have connections. I know powerful people. Jessica's smile was ice. You had connections, past tense, because in about 15 minutes, every major news outlet will receive a copy of this meeting. In 30 minutes, every Secura Palace employee will have a full report in their inbox. And in less than an hour, the board of directors will convene to vote on your termination for cause. Morrison's face flushed red. His hands shook as he gripped the edge of the table. You've destroyed my life. 20 years of building this restaurant. Ward looked him straight in the eye. You didn't build anything. You tore down people who were better than you in every way. Jessica stood. Mr. Morrison, you are terminated for systemic discrimination, creating a hostile work environment, violating the corporation's diversity and inclusion policies. All benefits revoked. Your personnel file will include the full report, and we will be pursuing legal action against you personally. Morrison staggered backward, clutching the table like a man watching his empire crumble. You ruined everything. Ward replied, his voice calm but unshakably firm. No. You destroyed it the moment you decided your skin color gave you the right to humiliate others. All I did was document the choices you made. As two security officers escorted Morrison out of the building, Ward stood silently by the window, watching through the glass. Jessica stepped up beside him and asked softly, "How do you feel?" Ward took a deep breath. "Not like I got revenge. I feel free. For the first time in years, I can breathe without the weight of being judged just for existing." At that very moment, Morrison stumbled onto the street, frantically trying to call in favors from old contacts. But he quickly discovered that news of his termination had already spread through the entire restaurant industry. His career, his reputation once built on the fragile foundation of bias and privilege, was collapsing in real time. Jessica looked at Ward with quiet respect. "You know, she said you could have just taken the job I offered and walked away. No one would have blamed you." Ward smiled, his first real smile in weeks. "My mom always said, if you have the power to change something and you choose not to, you've still made a choice. I chose to act." 6 months later, Ward stood in the center of what used to be an old warehouse in Harlem, now being transformed by a design team into a sleek, modern Japanese restaurant. Painted across the back wall in bold, clean letters, Kibo Hope, a name inspired by the Japanese word for hope, a vision Morrison could never have imagined. Jessica had kept her promise. And then some. Ward wasn't just the general manager. He was a co-owner with a 30% stake in the business. He had full autonomy over hiring and training. And most importantly, every employee would share in the profits, something almost unheard of in the industry. "How many people from Sakura Palace are you bringing back?" Jessica asked, scanning the staffing list. Everyone who wanted a second chance Ward grinned. Even a few who Morrison fired years ago. "Jenny's going to lead front of house. Marcus is running the kitchen. And Hiroshi, he agreed to be our cultural advisor." Ironically, Morrison had once taken pride in his standards, removing talent simply because of skin color. Now those very people were building something that would make Sakura Palace look like a relic of the past. Ward's phone buzzed. It was his mother calling from her night shift. "Son," she said, her voice beaming, "I just saw you in the paper. Are we sure this isn't a dream?" Ward laughed out loud. That morning's paper ran the headline, "Once a discriminated waiter, now opening a revolutionary restaurant in Harlem." The front page photo showed Ward standing proudly with his entire staff, people of every background and color, all beaming with genuine smiles. A stark contrast to the tension-filled, oppressive atmosphere Morrison once ruled over. "It's real, Mom," Ward said into the phone. "And remember when you told me about dignity in the workplace? Well, I'm building that now, a place where everyone is respected from day one." Meanwhile, Morrison's world had crumbled into something unrecognizable. The lawsuit filed by Ward and the former employees had escalated into a federal case for systemic discrimination. His so-called connections vanished overnight. From being a smug, untouchable power figure, Morrison now couldn't even land a managerial job at a diner. On opening day at Kibbo, the restaurant was packed wall to wall. But what Award felt wasn't triumph from revenge, it was pride in creating something far bigger than himself. The restaurant exceeded expectations almost instantly. Tables were booked out 2 months in advance. Food critics praised not just the menu, but the atmosphere, a space where kindness, dignity, and diversity weren't slogans, but lived values. The staff laughed easily. Customers from all walks of life felt welcome, not just served, but seen. During one of the busy evening services, Marcus, now head chef, came over and nudged him. Table 12 wants to thank you personally. They said they've never felt so respected in a restaurant before. Award made his way to the table where an elderly couple was waiting. The woman looked up at him and smiled softly. We just wanted to say thank you. It's been so long since we've felt truly welcome in a place like this. Moments like that reminded Award exactly why he fought so hard, not for payback, but to create a space where no one had to endure what he once did at Sakura Palace. 1 year after being fired, Award sat in his office at Kibbo, reviewing a proposal to open a second location in Brooklyn. His mother had officially retired. Award insisted on covering all her expenses, making sure she could finally rest after decades of hard work. The team at Kibbo had become more than co-workers. They were family, and Morrison. They say he's now working as an assistant manager for a fast food chain out in the suburbs, a man who once looked down on people like Award, now surviving off the goodwill of business owners who believe in second chances. Award looked out the window of his office, watching people pass along the streets of Harlem, all shades of skin, every age, every background. Some paused to read the menu posted outside Kibbo. That was the very community Morrison once tried to erase. And now they were the foundation of Award's success. The greatest revenge wasn't destroying Morrison, it was building something so good, so true, that everything Morrison once stood for became utterly irrelevant. If you've ever been underestimated just because of how you look, remember this: success is the loudest answer. Subscribe for more real stories that inspire and empower.